Hey everyone, it's Allie, and with the first reset of Tower of Adversary happening in about a week or so, I wanted to make a quick video talking about my experience with it, as well as sharing some of the tips that allowed me to clear a little bit further into Tower of Adversary that I don't think are very obvious at first glance, as the game doesn't make you aware of some of these things. So the first thing we should talk about is what is the Tower of Adversary itself. This is a monthly challenge that makes you go through various waves of either AoE scenarios or single target boss fights, which reward you a currency based on how fast you can complete the challenge, which then allow you to go and get yourself quite a lot of really nice rewards. The main two rewards at Tower of Adversary is going to be quite a lot of astrolites, which allow you to do more pulls for 5-star characters and weapons, as well as hazard records, which is primarily used to either buy yourself resonator experience, weapon experience, or echo experience. This echo experience is the single most important thing outside of all the astrolites that you get. It's a main thing that you want to aim for every month to get enough adversary points to actually be able to purchase all 50 advanced steel tubes from the Tower of Adversary shop. In terms of the Tower of Adversary itself, it's going to consist of 3 zones: the stable, experiment, and eventually the hazard zone, which have various towers with different challenges for you to complete. These towers are going to require you to do 4 separate waves, with the final wave always being a boss fight. To actually be able to tackle these challenges, you are going to need to set up a party of 3 members, and all of your members are going to have a resource called Vigor, which is going to stop you from being able to complete everything with just 1 set of characters. This Vigor cost is only used up when you fully complete the challenge, meaning you have infinite attempts to actually complete everything. One thing that the game doesn't really make obvious to you is that if you were to go and attempt a challenge that you've already completed with a different set of characters, you do end up getting that Vigor back. This means you can play around with different compositions, allowing you to potentially retry some waves where you could potentially swap out a support or a sub DPS or even your main DPS around to potentially let you clear a challenge a little bit faster, giving you one of the challenge goals that you previously weren't able to obtain. To add on to this, which again the game doesn't really spell out for you, is that you do not need to use the same party for a given tower. For example, here in my resident tower, I specifically swapped between Rover and Encore to be able to tackle this tower and fully complete it with all the rewards. What I specifically chose to do here is because the 4th wave is always going to be a boss challenge, I specifically chose to tackle that said 4th wave with my Encore setup, which does substantially higher single target DPS than my Rover setup currently can do. This does mean that I use up 8 of my total Vigor on Encore specifically for the 2 boss challenges. That did mean that I had to clear the rest of both the towers with my Rover setup. This wasn't too difficult to do, as Rover has amazing AoE, which was really good, as all of the 3 other waves are basically just AoE challenges, and this allowed me to have a substantially easier time in the experiment zone than I previously had, where I just attempted to do 1 tower fully with 1 composition, another tower fully with the other composition. Now, to add on to this, there is something else that is really important to keep in mind, especially as you push into the hazard zone, and that is going to be how monsters actually take damage. There are going to be 2 main things that are going to contribute to how much damage you actually do to an enemy. The first one being the level difference between you and said enemy, and the second one being the resistance type that the enemy is currently strong to. Every single level that an enemy gains in this game is going to massively increase the amount of defense that they have. Not only that, but their health is going to go up at the same time, and if you are substantially lower level compared to the enemy that you're fighting, that defense bonus that the enemy has, in addition to the massive amount of additional health they have, is going to exponentially make the enemy substantially tankier in comparison to you fighting that same enemy at the same level of your character. An example of this being that if you have a level 60 character, which is the current cap that we can go to, you are going to be doing somewhere around 30% less damage in comparison to you fighting the same level 70 monster as a level 60 monster instead. To show you just how bad this can get, if you were to fight a level 100 monster in comparison, you are doing somewhere around 70% less damage to them. Defense ramps up very quickly, and it's going to be the thing that's going to stop you from pushing very far into the hazard zone, simply because the enemies in the hazard zone ramp up in difficulty very, very quickly, starting at level 70 with the basic challenge and ramping all the way up to level 90 for the 4th wave. In most cases, for this first reset, people are not going to really go past the 3rd challenge, as the level 90 enemies are basically just not going to be killable within the 5-minute period. The other thing to take into account here, and this is going to be massively important for the hazard zone, is the enemy's damage resistance. Every time you start a wave, you're going to be able to see the damage resistance that the enemies are going to have, and this is going to make them take 50% less damage from a given damage type. In the case of this challenge here, the The wolves and the lizards are fusion type, meaning they're going to take 50% less fusion damage, and the roach shroom is havoc type, making it take 50% less havoc damage. This is something that you're going to have to take into consideration, and you're going to have to plan what your main DPS damage type is going to be, as if you attempt to do, for example, this challenge with Encore, you're going to have a really bad time. This does also mean that you're going to want to have as many different main DPS types as possible, meaning that you're not going to want to, for example, have a full Daijin team and a full Rover team as two of your teams, as if you encounter a wave that has nothing but havoc damage in it, both of those comps are going to have a really bad time. This means you're going to want to invest into, for example, having Havoc Rover and Encore and Calcharo and GN, rather than specifically just focusing on one specific damage type. If you want to just see how bad this can be and why this matters so much, let's take a look at my Hazard Zone Resident Tower specifically. For the first challenge, I had no issues clearing it with Encore, and the level 70 enemies proved no difficulty at all, allowing me to clear it with all 3 challenge goals very easily. For the second zone, because the monsters were specifically both Fusion and Havoc, I was barely able to finish the challenge in time with my Encore comp, barely beating the whole thing with around 30 seconds left. For the third challenge, even though these enemies were level 80, meaning they were substantially tankier in comparison to the first and second challenge, I was able to complete it with the second challenge goal done, even though these enemies were substantially tankier than the previous challenges. The reason for this being was because there were no fusion types here, meaning that my Encore was doing substantially more damage than previously. Elemental resistance is a really big deal, so please take into consideration and plan your teams accordingly. With all this, hopefully you should have a little bit of an easier time clearing the Tower of Adversary, and hopefully some of these tips, which again, I hate that the game doesn't immediately just spell out for you at how important these are, especially when doing an endgame activity like this, where you're fighting very overpowered monsters in comparison to how strong your characters are, really matters. If you have any questions on this, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so if you have any questions and you would like to ask them to me personally, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you live, or if you simply just want to come by and hang out with all the cuties, I'd be more than happy to have you as a part of my community. With all that said, I hope you cuties enjoyed this video, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you all in the next video.